Alan, Darby, Jacqueline, Martínez. This is the Buyer's Boardroom. Learn the most about who you are today and where you want to be after. Welcome back, friends and family, to your Buyer's Boardroom. I am Rick Music, and here in the Buyer's Boardroom, historically, we've been bringing you an all-access pass to the world of M&A from a buyer's perspective. That's the Buyer's Boardroom. We've cast a light on what buyers are looking for, deal structures, and we always have top industry thought leaders providing that up-to-date insight for each episode. Today, we're going to flip the script just a little bit, and I think it's time to cast a bit more light on what an M&A advisor does and what they bring to the conversation. When we started this podcast, we did it with the notion that Alaris was going to change the M&A conversation, or the M&A advisor conversation. And to that end, today, we don't need any expert guests because, well, we have two of the best thought leaders in the industry right now. Now, my notes indicate that that's actually you guys. Today, Alan and Jacqueline, you're going to carry the stage for us. And, I apologize if this creates any confusion, but yes, our two subject experts are Alan and Jacqueline, and I'm that other guy. Guys, it is great to see you, but listen, we've been doing great work here, and we have really, really provided a lot of data from a buyer perspective. And I think it's fair to say that, between the three of us, we could really cast a light on where the value is being added in the M&A conversation. So, guys,
we do think we're offering a differentiated pathway to partnership for a seller who's contemplating, what does it mean to transact with a larger buyer? But it occurred to me and Jacqueline that perhaps a bit of education on just what an M&A advisor does, where do they deliver value to either the seller or the buyer in the process would be helpful. Because, as we describe what we do to sellers, when we share what we do with buyers, even the most sophisticated ones often seem like they don't possess the full kind of knowledge of what is it that Alaris or any M&A advisor is attempting to do. And so we thought it would be a great podcast, a shorter one, albeit. So we're not going to have a guest on today's episode. It'll just be us three chatting about it. But we thought it would be a great idea just to help them know, okay, this is what you should be seeking if you are thinking about hiring an M&A advisor. And I would be the first to tell you, you don't need an M&A advisor in this process. Similar to a client who inherited $20 million doesn't need to hire a financial advisor. The question is it wise for you to have an M&A advisor, just like it would be, is it wise for a person with significant assets and complexity in their personal financial situation to perhaps seek guidance in that regard? So that's the topic of today. And Jacqueline, why don't you tee it up, like how we think about categorizing the different value prop that an M&A advisor can bring?
Sure. So most M&A advisors that you're going to work with, there are three main work streams, and what happens within each one of those and the order of the way things work will vary by advisor. But the first thing would be around data organization and just education around the M&A landscape at a high level, taking all of your data, organizing it, packaging it up nicely in a way that a buyer can ingest the information and highlighting the unique opportunities that your business brings to the table. And then from there, going out and sourcing credible buyers that would be a good match for this to really take your business to the next level, give the support that you need and solve for the things that you're looking for. And then the third step, of course, which I think is where most people think most of our time is spent, but it's equally really across the three streams. But the deal negotiation and due diligence, those parts of it, that's the final mile.
Well, this is helpful. I'm excited about this, given that that's what we do every day, is to cast a brighter light on where we do and where we add value. And, typically when wealth management firms start working with Alaris, we spend the first month or so just kind of discussing the different pathways to partnership, right? So we educate on the types of transactions that exist, and we spend, the equal amount of time hearing from the owners and what they're actually looking for and what they're solving for, which I think is important, which essentially brings us into phase one. Alan, why don't you take us through the data and education that goes in? And by the way, it's a lot. It's a lot. So take as much time as you want on this, Alan.
So Jacqueline touched on something, the third part of the process, and I would even add a fourth, which we call the post-LOI workflow and cadence. But that third part, the deal negotiation, is what people tend to think we spend all of our time doing. And that's obviously a critical part of it, but there's a lot of preparatory work to get done before you even broach that part of the process. And so, what is the educational and data organization component? So, to me, this is like the foundational bedrock that has to occur in order for there to be a successful buyer identification and matching process, followed by a deal negotiation, et cetera.
I have one question, Alan.
Yeah.
Before you, I just want to know, out of every deal that you guys have done, the education that you're about to give, have they known this all? All my data's perfect and I'm rock and roll and I've known everything? Or is it like, oh, golly,
Easily, it's one of the things I think that they're most surprised by, but also the most happy about. So it starts with, what is the process? What can you expect to be occurring in your life for the next 6 to 8 months that it takes to get a deal done? Because it's a heavy lift. I mean, you got to be ready to roll up your sleeves and go to work and finding your ideal partner. So we establish a framework for just what they can expect in the process. Then it moves into the education on the M&A landscape, a discussion about general terms. What does EBOC mean? What's a retention payment period? All these various things that they've likely never heard of. They may have read it in an article, but they don't know what it really means as it pertains to them. So we've got to walk them through some of that so that they're not constantly being surprised by terms and things that they're hearing. Then we're going to educate them on the buyer landscape. Who are the broad buyers out there? And what we're really talking about is not names specifically, but how they structure their models. Who are the capital providers? Who are the strategic national acquirers? Who are the ones that do a full acquisition versus a minority structure? All these different buyer models, and discuss the pros and cons. So the first part is that the educational component, because everything flows from that. It's just much easier when you have some foundational concepts before diving head first. And then is the data organization. Data organization is simply taking all of the relevant things that a buyer is going to want to see. It's the financial information, your 3 years of your P&L typically, client segmentation. There needs to be an operations assessment done on the business, a staffing assessment, all of these things that you probably have a general awareness of in your current business because you produce these types of things for yourself. But the key thing that Jacqueline said is, how does a buyer want to see it? And that's the organization component of it. So it's not just getting your data, collecting it, but it's structuring it in the way that we know that the buyers want to see it.
I would say too that so many years of working, for a buyer directly, United Capital, and sourcing for them for almost a decade on Alan's side, we know how things can be perceived and the order of information, how it's coming out, and getting ahead of that, ahead of the narrative around it of why something may be a certain way. Like for example, we talk a lot about the net new asset data. Maybe in a given year, there's a dip in the assets, and without a narrative around it, maybe there's a very good reason for it. Someone left the team who overall was great for team morale that they left, but clients left with them, and leading the description around what happened, not letting a buyer jump to conclusions about why something happened. Those instances, a dozen of those will happen in a given transaction that we're getting ahead of to shine a firm in the best light and put the focus on the right areas of where the opportunities are for growth.
In that organizational component of putting their data together, the way the buyer wants to see it, as she's saying, things are going to jump out to us. And I think it's better for it to jump out to us so that we can ask, okay, why? So for example, this past week, we had a buyer, relatively small firm, and they had a sizable E&O expense in their P&L, like probably easily 5x what we would normally see as an E&O cost for a firm that size. And our analyst brought it to our attention, and so that prompted us to reach out to the seller and say, hey, what gives here? As it turned out, there was an E&O claim filed recently that caused the insurance cost to go up. So we were able to flag that and, of course, inquire what the nature of the claim was, and turns out it wasn't that big of a deal. So, but we're going into it, flagging that for the buyer. So when they see it, it's right in the notes and there's a good explanation for it. And it tends, when you do that in a variety of different things that had they discovered it, could be this aha. And the thing we're trying to protect against, any one of those little aha red flags might not be that big of a deal on its own, but if you compile several of those together, it starts to create a narrative, a negative narrative that we just want to avoid. And so part of that data organization is not just putting the stuff together, but it's going through it and try to identify the things that we know that buyers are going to pick up on and going ahead and building that narrative around it. So sometimes it's a negative story, but even putting that out there in an open, transparent way will go a long way towards having that negative situation not be as impactful to their attractiveness to you and hopefully your valuation.
Yeah. So anybody that might just think it's just as simple as, well, I can just give them my numbers. I don't need Alaris to give them my numbers. It's the story within the numbers. I guess it's the game within the game. In a lot of ways, I feel like we're a PR firm in part of this.
Yeah. Well, we pride ourselves on being transparent. One thing that M&A advisors unfortunately are a bit notorious for is masking things or taking financials and sort of modifying and manipulating them in ways that aren't really sustainable in the buyer universe. So we don't do that at Alaris. We think it builds tremendous goodwill with the buyer, even if there's a negative situation. Is just look, it is what it is. It's your business reality. Let's give the explanation why it is, and assuming it's not something really bad, like you committed fraud or something like that in the past, then we can overcome it. We know what the buyers are going to get, what they're going to look for, how they want to see it, and we know the things that are going to cause them to say, okay, what's wrong with this picture? We just need to be there with the affirmative answers to make sure that it's, as Jacqueline said, putting them in the best light possible while being transparent.
All right. Well, I think this first phase is pretty important, which I guess brings us to the next phase, which is buyer identification and the matching process. Now, guys, I'm spitballing here, but I'm trying to think of the M&A advisor in this conversation and where Alaris is changing the conversation.
I might get a little elevated here because this is something that we're really passionate at Alaris about changing in the industry. So I would say our data, our education, our data organization process, probably not too dissimilar from what a lot of sell-side advisors do. I mean, I think perhaps our transparency is a little bit different, but ours is pretty much the same process as you would get from most sell-side advisors who do a good job at that. But this next part is where we really differentiate ourselves in the market. So it's in the buyer identification and matching process. So after your data is organized, at the end of that, you're going to have what most people refer to as a SIM deck or a confidential information memorandum. Now we have a very unique version of that, but let's just say it's the SIM deck that's produced. That's the work product. And then
what is that?
The SIM deck, confidential information memorandum. It's basically, in most scenarios, it's a PowerPoint deck that the sell-side advisor creates. It's the story. It's the high-level story supported with some high-level data, information about your team, what's motivating you in the transaction. It's something that the buyer could look at, call it 10 to 20 slides long and determine, is this someone we would want to talk to? So what most sell-side advisors do in terms of helping you find a buyer is what's generally referred to as a financial auction. I call it a blind financial auction because they don't even send the SIM deck out at first. They send an email with just a high-level, few paragraph narrative of your business. They blast that out to dozens of potential buyers, and they're just trying to see who bites. And they're asking them, who would like to participate in this process? And so the buyers that read the email and think they're interested are asked to sign an NDA, and that gets them into the process. And immediately, they're asked to put forth what's called an indication of interest, a financial offer. Using the parameters in the SIM deck that you got after signing the NDA, you're asked to put forth a high-level offer.
So just to be clear, no interaction with the seller, usually no conversation, right?
Yeah, thank you, Jacqueline.
We're just bidding on an email?
You're making a offer based on the SIM deck. Most sell-side advisory processes, you're not allowed to talk to the seller. The buyer is not allowed to talk to the seller at this stage. They want to get the offers in first, the first indications of interest. So any buyer that signed the NDA, they get the SIM deck, and presumably they're going to follow that up with a high-level offer. The sell-side advisor, in collaboration with the seller, takes those offers, sorts through them, tries to identify the ones they think they're their best, and they are going to start these series, they call them rounds, where they look at all the offers. They may just eject a few that are just way off the leading offers immediately. and then they'll go back to the ones that made the cut and invite them to the next round. At this point, they're typically permitted to speak to the seller, maybe an hour-long Zoom call. Certainly not a visit or anything robust that would help the buyer and the seller get to the point, is this a cultural fit? It's just an introductory call, and then they're asked to put forth another offer. And they go through this series of rounds sufficient that the field of buyers gets narrowed down to just a small handful. And at that point, they will start to endeavor to see who's a cultural fit. But it's after all of the other buyers have been eliminated purely on the math, purely based on their offer. And here's the challenge we have with that. If you ask any buyer or any seller, like, what's the most important aspect of the deal? What's the important aspect of the partnership? And they're going to say cultural fit. Both sides are. And so it seems ludicrous to us at Alaris that you would eliminate the vast majority of the buyer pool based on their initial offers with no allowance to determine from either side, was it a cultural fit or not? It just seems kind of laughable that that's where you would begin. And so what we do at Alaris, we've inverted that. So we run what we call a cultural auction. And so our process is rooted in the reality that we've spent thousands of hours cataloging the buyer models. And we don't believe any other sell-side advisor in the country has done this. Not, frankly, they haven't even come close to doing this because they haven't had to care. There's been no competition to the financial auction process. So there's been no need to go get to know the buyers. Well, that's what we've done. It started when I was an owner of an RA doing acquisitions. Jacqueline and I worked together at United. I was a buyer advisor for them. So we understood what it meant to really get the cultural fit right from the buyer's perspective. And so when we started Alaris, even though we are sell-side advisors, we represent the seller, we care about the buyer outcome. We want a good match for both parties. And so our model, we've had to take just about 30 to 50 hours with every buyer on our roster, bring them through an exhaustive process where we're collecting all of the things that the seller would want to know. What's their history? Who are their people? What are their mandatory points of alignment? What's their autonomy profile? What's their client experience look like? What's their investment platform? You know, all of the things that you would want to know about life on the other side of the transaction, including their math. So we have their math too, but we know all about their, you know, who they're looking for, who they're not looking for, et cetera. And then we have our lens technology, which we're rolling out to the public in late summer this year. We think that's going to change the game. But all of that data is housed there. So when the seller comes through that process, there's an algorithmic scoring coupled with our human expertise that is ranking the buyers in terms of match with the seller entirely based on culture. Okay, not this blind financial auction mess. And so we invite buyers who are deemed cultural fits to the bid process. So we're going to, like a sell side process does, we are going to have multiple offers on the practice, but only asking buyers who are cultural fits to this process. We think that makes sense. Like, why would you even invite a buyer who's not a cultural fit to bid on a practice? It makes no sense. You know, it's like, would you really? Because the range of, Jacqueline, tell me if you think you agree with this. From the top bidder to the bottom bidder, like typically, what's the gap?
No more than 10, maybe 15%.
Yeah, it's not this. It's not like one offer is coming in at 5x EBITDA and another one's coming in at 15. You know, it's not. It's usually like the highest is going to be at 10, maybe the lowest is at 7.5 in there. You know, so it's like a 2, maybe 3x delta or less. Now, we're not even talking about terms because that's a whole nother aspect of this equation. So my question is, let's say that the highest bidder in the financial auction was 2 turns of the multiple higher than the absolute best cultural fit. But it was a disaster culturally. Are you telling me that you would really sell your business for 1 to 2 turns higher of the multiple? And end up being a cultural mess for you, your team, and your clients? Of course not. So why even offer them to this? And further, it's our conviction that the cultural auction leads to higher valuations because we believe firms are more aggressive on valuation when they believe it's a cultural fit. That only makes sense. You know, it's like if they fall in love with you because they think you're a fit, however they measure that, wouldn't you think they'll naturally be more aggressive in pricing terms?
Most sellers are not walking away in a transaction. They're wanting to stay on to the team for, 3, 5 plus years, right? And so why start the relationship with acrimony, a buyer feeling like they're bidding against themselves, even if you do end up partnering with them? It just sets the relationship off on the wrong foot versus leading with culture. Buyers take their offer very seriously because they know that this really is a match for them. They want to win the deal. They'll put their best foot forward and results in better partnerships, we believe.
Well, that really tracks. And I guess what I'm hearing, and I want to make sure that everybody hears that's joining us today, and thank you for being here, is, you know, sell side advisors, the traditional sell side advisor probably knows the top 50 firms, but they probably are very intimate with 5, 6, maybe 7 that they know really well of that 50, right? Because anybody can say, well, I know those top 70 and I can just call them myself. But where Alaris seems to be changing the conversation of that very same list of 50 or more, whatever the numbers that I know we're adding, we are spending the time.
Oh, we get told repeatedly with buyers, like, we've never seen anyone even come remotely close to trying to get to know us as much as Alaris had.
It's one thing to say, yeah, I know them. It's a whole other thing to know them like Alaris knows them. And I think there's just incredible value in that. And I think changing the conversation to putting culture on the front is changing the conversation. And I just think that's important.
It sort of comes down to, how do you define getting the best deal? Because everyone wants the best deal, but how do you define that? If you define the best deal as the initial valuation period, then a financial auction will produce the result you're looking for. But we find that most sellers, that's not how they would articulate what their best deal is. The best deal is the best blend of the initial offer, life after the transaction from a quality of life perspective, for them, their team, and their clients, and the best ongoing share of economics. It's those three together that define what the best deal is. And a financial auction will not produce that result. You have to run a cultural auction to get the answer to all three of those. And to be able to run a cultural auction means you have to know the cultures of the buyers, period. And so that, we're very passionate about that at Alaris, is lead with culture. And we believe that it equates to a better quality of life and a better economic offer, because buyers get really excited about, well, they're much more willing to be aggressive for firms that they fall in love with.
I'm loving this, and I'm loving the passion, because there is a lot of it, which brings us into phase 3, which is deal negotiation. And I can count on 2 hands and 2 feet where I've heard, guys, well, I've already got the offer and I think I know where I'm going. So I think I'm good. And I'm just like, wow, that really falls flat. And so I'm very excited about this segment on how wrong you actually are the minute you have an offer, and how far there really is to go, and how much work needs to be done before this gets to the end. So, Jacqueline, I'm assuming this is when the offers are flying in.
Right. So offers are coming in. So we, of course, a big part of our role is really dissecting all the things that Alan's talking about there. The initial valuation, your share of post acquisition economics, how much of, as revenue grows, how much of that are you participating in from a compensation level, estimating future values of the equity that you may be granted in the transaction, the full picture there. Once you've selected, okay, this is the buyer that I want to proceed with, we're moving forward, then it starts a whole series of post LOI activities. So we're negotiating purchase agreements, we have due diligence, and all the while we're a sounding board for the seller during that experience to say, like take due diligence, for example. It's a very lengthy process. It's very in depth, and some of them are very hard to produce, so we can be a sounding board to say, okay, this is really important. Let's see how we can work around this. We interface with the buyers to maybe find a middle ground on something, and really just set expectations about the items that really are important and which ones maybe aren't as necessary. And similarly, when going through the purchase agreement negotiations, there's going to be items that your lawyers may flag to you as being potential theoretical issues, right? And always bringing it back to reality, reminding folks of the other side of that, the risks that you're effectively asking the buyer to take on, and knowing that you want to be with this firm for a long time. and all advisors are signing similar agreements, you're now a shareholder in that firm. I'm just reminding of the bigger picture here when you're going through that.
One of the things we asked earlier is, should you hire an M&A advisor? Well, it's not just the negotiation of the deal that is the role of the M&A advisor. We talked about the educational data organizational component, the buyer identification and matching process, the deal negotiation, which is what everyone wants to talk about. But you can't always quantify the value of the advisor in just the deal negotiation. There's so many things that happen. Don't you think, Jacqueline, they tend to be sort of emotionally rooted after once you've chosen, you've got the offer, that's pretty much agreed to. You've gone through the cultural dating process. Now we're in your world, the post LOI process. It's just not fun for a lot of people. You're dealing with lawyers and transition and due diligence, and emotions can flare. I mean, it's getting really real now at this point. And I think a big part of what an M&A advisor can do, and this is for both parties, the buyer and the seller, is just keep everyone rooted in reality, keep everything calm, keep everything on a cadence to get the partnership done. And so that's a huge aspect of the benefit to an advisor, a benefit of what an advisor brings to the table.
I mean, and here we are, M&A advisors, but do buyers like working with M&A advisors?
Do buyers like? I think the answer to that would be if you look at all the buyers, when they ultimately go to transact, all of them hire sell-side advisors. So I don't think they dislike sell-side advisors. I can tell you they loathe the financial auction process. You think about it as a buyer. I mean, put your buyer hat on for 1 second and think about that process that you're being asked to participate. You get an email with very little information, teases you enough to say, sure, I'll take a bite of this. Then you get a send deck, which is just frankly, a scant more bit of information. And then you're asked to put forth an offer. It's not a binding offer you're being asked to put forth, but it's still an offer. And then you might get to spend an hour with this firm that's supposed to become your partner. And then you're asked to sharpen your pencil and put forth another offer and another. There's no point before you're down to the last one or two that you really get to determine, is this a good fit for us? It's a horrible process. And I can tell you from personal experience, as a sell-side advisors, the buyers really dislike that process because they don't think it's genuine.
Getting caught up on some things. As I understand it to date, it's uncommon for a buyer to support any of the fee on a sell-side advisor, correct? So my question is, why are buyers open to supporting Alaris's fee?
That's a great point. So most of the work in the traditional sell-side process is borne on by behalf of the seller, right? That just makes sense. And I would say the reason that the buyers in that financial auction are not willing to support the fee in any way is because that sell-side process delivers no value to the buyer. Because again, it's all about the math. The buyers are being asked to bid against themselves. It's actually working against them in a way, which some of the sell-side advisors might argue that's what you want. I just think that's ridiculous. In our model, as you know, we bifurcate the fee. We're sell-side advisors, but the buyer is actually supporting the fee in our model. And the reason we do it, we figured this out. It took several years to get here, but we figured out if we actually endeavor to learn the buyer model, go spend time with them, sit in their offices, interview them, find out truly what they're looking for as a part, if someone going to join their family such that they have a good outcome for it. If we don't monkey with the financials, I mean, we want them to be in the best light possible to maximize the valuation, but we're not going to strip the P&L bare just to artificially inflate EBITDA and jack up the valuation such that the buyer can't support the business in their world. If we actually don't become a gateway to getting to know the seller, we are actually a catalyst for them to get to know. I mean, we promote them getting to know the seller. Once we get to that buyer identification process in our model, we tell the buyers, go get them. Please go call them, go spend time with them. We're not your gateway. This is your transaction as much as it is the seller's. So we're not a barrier to you getting to know them. We want to accelerate that. So because of the way we do all of that, that's tremendous value to the buyers. We're out there sourcing opportunities that they don't have to. We're screening these sellers against their models. They don't have to do that. We're organizing all the data so that it's immediately ingestible into their model. All of those things are value adds to the buyer. And because of that, they're willing to support the fee in our, what we call our deal advocacy model. So not only is it a better cultural fit likelihood, it is a better financial outcome because we think the valuations are higher when culturally aligned firms are matched, but it's less expensive from the sell-side advisory fee because the buyer is getting value in that and they're willing to support the fee.
So sell-side advisor, first and foremost, start to finish.
Correct.
There's no financial incentive over one buyer or another, correct?
Right. Completely agnostic.
You know, there is a perception that you get what you pay for, guys. Now, I think you've done a very good job of laying out value in so many places and time put in, but there is a perception, or if I were looking to beat us up in one way or another, do you get what you pay for in this, guys? How would you answer that?
It's more about the conviction that a buyer has when they're offering and putting their best foot forward for that offer, because they know that this is in fact an opportunity, a firm that would be successful in their organization. So we don't believe that a seller is getting less value because the buyer values the process that they're in and respects that and is getting value from it too. Our process saves the buyer time. We're streamlining the way that they can ingest information and make a decision to confirm that this is a good match for them as well. So they're simply benefiting from it too.
I assume you're talking about the valuation, because it's really hard to quantify the cultural lift that you get through going through this process. I think it's common sense. If you actually run a cultural auction first, doesn't it follow the likelihood of you getting a better cultural fit? Doesn't that make common sense? I think most people would agree to that. Yeah, if we actually pay attention to culture, we might get a better cultural outcome. Your question is, I think, really rooted in because the seller is paying a lower fee, are they, lowering their valuation in somehow or getting less? And there's just no data on either side to support that.
The flimsiness of my argument is people are quick when they hear it's less and they know it's more somewhere else. I think people are quick to go there.
Yeah, I can see that. Again, none of the sell-side advisors who run a financial auction are going to produce any data that says that process produces a higher valuation. They're going to say, when we get these buyers fighting against one another in this financial auction, that's going to drive up the price. And show me the data that proves that. Conversely, show me the data that says the cultural auction produces a higher valuation. We can't, because we don't have the data to compare it to, the financial auction data. So it's just a common sense kind of conclusion. Let me give you an analogy. So my wife and I were recently shopping for furniture. We're building a house. And there's this mansion in Palm Beach that was being torn down. My wife found out about it in an auction, and they're listing all of this furniture, appliances, and stuff for sale. So it was all online. We go online. We're looking at all these things. There's a wolf range on there. Okay, I love wolf ranges. That's what I want to put in my new house. I know this particular range is probably 24 grand new. Okay, but this is like a 3-4-year-old range. They're offering it. They say their starting price is going to be like $3,000 in the bid. I look at my wife and I was like, oh my gosh, if we can get that for anything close to that, it's a home run. But looking at just the picture, I just can't tell how good it is. Do the dark burners work? Are there scratches on the inside of it? Is it got mold anywhere in it? All these things that you just couldn't tell because I couldn't go see it, put my hands on it, touch it. Well, so before the auction, we concluded that the max we're going to offer was $6,000 because I figure even if I had to go fix it, there's such a disparity in savings, it's worth it. So my wife is a very outgoing person. She calls the auctioneer. She gets buddy-buddy with them before the auction is going to take place. And the guy says, hey, would you like to go see it? And she's like, do you want to go see the house? I was like, hell yeah, I want to go see the house. They had plenty of stuff in there. So we actually got to go see the house before anyone else. I opened it up. The thing is brand new. This kind of happened to never cook. So it's a perfect wolf range. And so because we were able to see it, because we were able to determine that this is an actual good thing, we went home and I was like, I'll pay $10,000 for that. But you get my point. Is because I was able to determine in an analogy, it was a cultural fit for me. I was immediately interested in paying more. Doesn't that make sense that a buyer would do the same thing? with a seller if they fall in love.
And imagine getting pressure to go to 7 when you had offered 6 without seeing it, touching it, all of that. That how off-putting that would be. Yeah.
Well, and anecdotally, we ask buyers all the time this question: would you be more aggressive for a firm that you feel is a cultural fit? And it doesn't even take them a nanosecond to say, of course we would. In fact, they've told us the times that they bail out of the financial auction because they couldn't get to the point of determining it was a cultural fit, yet they were being asked to up their price.
Well, guys, this has been good. I like, kind of the three of us sitting around the living room table, enjoying each other's company for once and not having company. It's not that I don't like our guests, but I think the world needs to hear what you guys have to say and how you guys are changing the conversation. I think it's making a lot of sense, and it's making, we inherited the way business is being done right now, but it doesn't mean it's the right or the best way. And I think you're changing that conversation, which brings us to my favorite part of the show. It's our mailbag. So for those of you that have a question, you have a concern, you want to pay us a big compliment, we are at Boardroom at AlarisAcquisitions.com. That is Boardroom at AlarisAcquisitions.com. We will read your questions on future episodes, and we love to do it. Oh man, do I have a good question today. And it's kind of on book. Carl in Atlanta, why do I need Alaris or anyone else for that matter if I've already found a buyer?
He's already
found-
found
okay.
a buyer.
Yeah.
Actually, that's common. We get put in contact with firms all the time who have already started the process. They've already dated a few buyers. They may even gotten some offers. And I think, Jacqueline, to me, I think they just wake up and go, oh my gosh, maybe I should get someone who knows what they're doing involved.
Right. Yeah. For some reason, they still reach out even with that. So what is it? And maybe it's that needing to feel confident that it's the right fit. And guiding.
Well, look,
Right.
buyers are professionals, sellers are novices. That's the reality.
Talk about that. What does that mean?
Well, you have the reality that, like Joe Duran used to say this when the robo-advisor thing was a big craze, and I always loved this. He was like, I'm not worried about robo-advisors because when the dollar amount goes up and the complexity of their situation increases, they want an expert in their camp. They want a human, and this was against robo-advisors. Similar thing. In most cases, not all the time, this is the largest transaction that the owner of the RIA is going to have in their life. It represents a significant portion of their net worth. And it's certainly complex. Good Lord, we do a podcast on it. So it's got to have some complexity to it. But, because of those reasons, even if you've already found a buyer, like I will tell you this, and again, we're just talking about math here. Every time that we've been invited to a process, where the seller has already received an offer, and that's the buyer that they want, we've typically increased the offer like 20, 25%.
And sometimes
on average.
substantially. Yeah. I mean, even more than
Substantially
that.
more. Yeah.
And I mean, seller was already thrilled with what they had, but we're coming in and saying, this is not even close to market for your business. Yeah.
So Carl, item 1, we'll probably get you a better offer than you will on your own. There's a big one.
Well, it's not even the math. It could be the deal terms, it could be the payout structure, the amount paid at close, shorter time period for the reset or the retention period. It's not always just the offer. It could be these other things that make the whatever offer they had far more valuable and real. So look, it's a simple question to ask. I answer, I think. And if you're a do-it-yourselfer, go do it yourself. As a part of our process, like when a seller engages us, they can come through that whole data organization, buyer identification process. If they don't want guidance going forward, no problem. Like, we don't care, because all they have to do is point us to where you want us to send this information, and the buyer will pay that fee because, again, we've delivered tremendous value to them. But if you don't think we can outperform our fee, we can give you ample examples of where we've done just that. So that's my answer.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of what I think is a really, really great episode. And there's many, many, many more to come. Here we are at the very beginning of season 2. For Alan Darby, Jacqueline Martínez, and the rest of the Alaris team, I am Rick Music, and thank you for joining us here at the Buyer's Boardroom.